For the first time is Houlbrooke, who is representing ACT on campus. Next to him we have Jack Davies, the young Nats, with a much lower applause I can see. And next to him, in government at the moment, is TeRata Hikario from the Maori Party. We have Kieran Gainsford sitting in opposition on the left from the Labour. Representing the Greens on campus, we have Trish Tupoe. And sitting right at the far left where he belongs is Curwen Rolinson. So we'll start asking these guys to introduce themselves better than I could. So I'd like to hear who you are and what dragged you into this dark, dirty world of youth politics. And finally, if Kim.com hacked your emails, what would you find? We'll start out with Jack Davies.
Hello everyone, my name's Jack. As a proud member of AUSA and the Young Nationals. Is it really? I'm proud to say that I am a firm believer in students involved in politics. Politics governs everything, as a wise man once said. And if you want to make a difference in this country, you need to get involved, and that's certainly why I did. And if Kim hacked my emails, he'd find a lot of admin shit related to work. He'd find mostly pretty dull stuff and a few subscriptions to right-leaning magazines.
Alright, thank you, Jack. Coming up next, let's hear from Kieran.
Kia ora folks, I'm Kieran from the Labour Party. The reason I got into politics is because I grew up in Rotorua, and when I went to high school there was so many people who didn't come to school with enough, whether it was food, clothes, shoes, the equipment they needed to learn. And for me, there was a teacher at my school, and she used to run a soup kitchen for these kids, and when she actually retired and left, the impact that had on the school community I thought was really bleak. So I got into youth politics, and I deal with it all the time because I really truly believe in the power of societies and governments to come together and make individual people's lives better. So that's why I'm here, and I'm up here in front of all you folks this evening. And if Kim.com get my emails, you'll probably find far too many emails sent in a terribly intoxicated state to people that piss me off too much. So it's all about that.
So abusive emails. What about you, Curwen? Are we going to find any abusive emails in yours?
Abusive emails? Well, I got a few from the National Party, although I'm actually more concerned about the National Party having New Zealand first on its surveillance than I'm about Kim.com doing likewise. Now, in terms of why I got into politics, you've all heard me make this speech before. Once upon a time, New Zealand was first in the world. We led the world for prosperity and economic performance. Then these jokers from Labour and then National betrayed that promise and decided to cast us the ash heap of neoliberalism. I got into politics because I wanted to do something about it. Try and work with everybody in this room, apart from David Seymour, to try and actually bring back that prosperity. With New Zealand first, we are going to do exactly that. Thank you.
Woo! Right, so Louis, we know that Curwen got into politics to destroy you. Let's hear why you got into politics.
I probably always knew that I was a right-winger, so I didn't want to half-ass things and join the jonky socialists over here. So I went all the way, I joined ACT, did my best to get Don Brash into Parliament, failed miserably, and here I am, in the 1%.
I spent too much time
if you're going to look up my emails, to be honest, you just find a shitload of LinkedIn spam. Fuck.
So, let's hear from TeRata now. What got you into politics?
Kia ora tātou. Tuatahi meni ki ngā mana whenua, ki te marae o Waipapa, o tira ki ngā maunganga o Tini Wāhi. TeRata Hikario got into the Maori Party because he believes in kaupapa. I believe that right and left don't work for Maori. They might work for everyone else, but right and left is someone else's kaupapa. Ours is about being true to who we are as Maori, being true to who we are as whānau, as hapu, as iwi, and advancing the interests of everybody, because what's good for Maori is good for New Zealand.
and propping up our own government.
And thanks for that. Last but not least, let's hear from Trish for the Young Greens.
I'll just look towards the ladies' mic. koutou, walalole, ko hoto hinua, ko Trish Tupoe, o kuo whakapōwhana ki ai Green Party of Aotearoa. My name is Trish, and I first got involved in politics when I spent some time on the unemployment benefit. I got a phone call one day and I thought, oh, I've got a job interview. And really it was to come into the office to attend a Pacifica Youth Ready to Work program. And I found that just quite shit, really. Had to go to it every day, and I met a lot of young Pacifica youth who were very disincentivised to study and felt as though they couldn't do anything with their lives other than stay at home and support their families. And so that really motivated me to get involved with politics as a young Pacifica woman and sort of grow the Pacifica network, grow our representation in Parliament. And if Kim.com were to look through my inbox, he would probably find a string of emails from my tutors asking where I've been the past few weeks.
Alright, so we're all students here, and we all know that life seems to be getting a little bit harder year after year with student loans, student allowances, and we might get sick and tired of talking about it, but there's something that we think that is pretty important here, and we want to question all of these representatives on their views on that. So we know that the current government might not be the most popular in the room with the changes to the student loans and student allowances we've had. So Jack, do you think National on the right track? Is this really where we want to go with tertiary education to make it more expensive for students? Or?
I think we are on the right track, and I do think some of the policies, particularly the changes to the university council structure that National are putting in place, have been slandered, and the public have been misinformed by the media and by other political parties. So, no, I do think we're on the right track, and I'm really proud to stand behind John P.
This is the kind of track that Labour are pretty keen on, or not?
Nope. I can tell you right off the bat, firstly, I don't know why Jack chose to defend his university council changes, because they are simply indefensible. And secondly, in terms of making life a bit better for students, Labour absolutely 100% is behind people who want to do postgraduate qualifications and will restore allowances for postgraduate students in government. And in addition, I think what really needs to happen is, instead of taking away the representation of students, the government really needs to step in, I think, and fix the really sad, sorry state of how student unions are allowed to be bullied and cajoled by their institutions into a shadow of what they used to be. So Labour really wants to look hard at what we can do to make student unions and student voice generally on campus much stronger, so students can actually have a say in what they want from their government to make their study more worthwhile. That's what Labour thinks.
So we did a proposal in 2008 for a universal student allowance coming out of Labour. Is that something that Young Labour is still behind? Is that something that's still realistic in New Zealand?
Young Labour is still in behind that policy, and the party is currently a bit ambiguous on that. We haven't released all of our tertiary education policy yet, so I'll give you a few weeks to mull that one over, and you can see what happens when we make a big announcement in a few weeks' time. But I'm not 100% sure myself what the exact status of a fully universal allowance is.
Well, Curwen, you've got some views on this. How's New Zealand First tertiary education policy shaping up?
There's two things to be said here. The first is that the party which came up with the universal student allowance was New Zealand First in 1993. We're glad that Labour took 15 years to finally come around to our way of thinking. Actually, we're not glad, but thank you anyway. Now, when it comes to tertiary education, there are two key elements: accessibility and support while you are being educated. The Labour Party, under full Gough in the 1980s, increased your fees by over 1,000%. New Zealand First thinks this is absolutely abhorrent and will take steps to make sure you can access tertiary education. Then, in the early 1990s, Lockwood Smith decided to massively cut accession to the student allowance. We shall bring back a universal student allowance for all students, especially postgrad, and we shall make sure there are bonded merit schemes and other schemes involving KiwiSaver so that you can pay for your education right the way through your degree. How does that sound? Unaffordable. Thank you, Levi. If your party's pros in the USA, just the same as ours.
We've heard that maybe sounds unaffordable, so let's hear from Louis on that. What do you think about free education? What do you think about trapping people in New Zealand after they finish their degrees? Is that something that party are keen on?
I wouldn't track anyone, and you shouldn't need to really in any sort of service. The problem with university in New Zealand, it's actually 75% subsidised. And I know this is an unpopular thing to say in a room full of students, but we are lucky. We are privileged. We are going to be among the country's highest earners, and yet we receive this huge dose of middle-class welfare. ACT always stands against middle-class welfare, and we would start by removing interest on student loans.
Hey Louis, do you pay interest on your student loan, bro?
No.
Hypocrite!
I didn't choose that, man.
Alright, TeRata, what do you think about student loan schemes? Is it something where the Maori Party sits outside of the left or right? What's your stand on that?
So I returned to study last year to finish my teaching degree, and one of the things that I didn't like was the fact that I wasn't eligible for student allowance and I had to get loan living costs. The Maori Party believes that students have to be at the centre of everything in terms of their study, in terms of their education, because an educated population is a better population. So we say that the whole student loan system has to be completely reformed. The whole student loan system has to be completely reformed so that it's better and easier for us when we go out and get our work. We also would want to have student allowance for everyone that does a bachelor's degree, and we would also restore things like manaki tauita.
Didn't your party vote for most of these things being stripped away over the previous 6 years?
I wasn't aware that Winston Peters is in charge of what the Maori Party does there.
Just call him to account when they screw up.
Alright, so Trish, we all know that the Green Party are also pretty progressive on student issues, so we've heard a proposal recently to make all sort of transport free in off-peak hours. Is this something you think goes far enough to help students, or is there anything else the Green Party have got ready to go?
I think the Green Card is a great initiative. For people who are in my electorate of Mangarewa, it costs $7.50 to get the train to uni every day. That's a huge cost. The fourth largest cost for students is transport. So taking away that sort of financial strain can only be good things. The Green Party believes that everybody has a right to education, and taking away the transport cost is cutting down barriers to education. We also believe in capping fees, so we would want to progressively reduce fees until eventually we can have a fee-free tertiary education for all people.
Just on that particular point, with regard to parties advocating coloured cards for the purposes of transport, you know who came up with that idea. But with regard to the Green Party's Green Card, it gets it half price. A 40% subsidy all day, every day, is a lot better in my book than free public transport but only off-peak. If you have off-peak classes or on-peak classes, the Greens policy does nothing for you.
But most classes are actually between 10 and 5, which are during off-peak times. And also, even if you did have a class that was at 9 o'clock, you'd only be paying for like one trip to university a day, and you could go home during the day and it would be free. So it's still cutting down the cost quite progressively.
So we all know that all of the things that we want are going to cost money, and Curwen can sit up here and promise the world, but what do you think, Jack? Is this something that's affordable for New Zealand, or how can national government approach these kinds of things?
Sorry, Paul, what's that in regard to? The Green Card?
Do you think the Green Card, free education, all this kind of stuff, is that affordable for New Zealand?
No, personally no, I don't think the Green Card is affordable, and free education certainly isn't. I think what my friends on the opposite bench need to consider and what our view of this matter is that education is a tertiary education is a privilege. It is not a right. It is a privilege. We are all so privileged to be here. The government already funds 75% of all university fees for all of us, and you need to get to a point and you need to ask yourself, how much is enough? We believe that the status quo is a significant amount and a sufficient amount at that.
Hey Jack, you found $1.1 billion a year for tax cuts for the wealthy. How many $1 million for roads for the rural areas? Why can't you find a bit of money for public transport for students?
And also to Jack, I would say actually, the students who are going to benefit the most from this are the students who live the furthest from uni, who actually live in the suburbs in West Auckland and South Auckland. And the challenge I pose to you is, in what way are these students who desperately need tertiary education to pull themselves and their families out of the cycle of poverty that governments have locked them into in these suburbs? They need this tertiary education. They need the accessibility to this tertiary education to pull themselves out of that. So in what way are they privileged by this? Because I can't see it.
Privileged by going to university.
Yes, these people.
You really asking me that question?
These people from
how these people are privileged to go to university, Kieran? Are you really going to stand up there and ask me that?
I am actually, because to be honest, I want to cut them out.
Alright guys, it's getting a bit heated up here. We're not talking about
privilege, he thinks you're talking about himself.
We're talking about the subject of privilege and whether it's only privileged students who get to go to university in the first place. Is this something that the ACT Party is worried about, breaking down inequality in New Zealand through tertiary education?
Education is definitely probably a primary key to sorting out inequality in New Zealand. The thing is, if you can afford to go to, if you're committed enough to go to tertiary education, you can do that. There are loan schemes available. It's a good scheme, but the problem is, a lot of the problem is people earlier on in the secondary school system, they aren't achieving good enough results to enter university. And we're talking about minorities, people from poor backgrounds, Pacifica Maori. This is why we support charter schools, a serious alternative aimed towards disadvantaged groups.
When the ACT Party talks about privilege, they mean white privilege, gender white privilege.
Alright, so when you're talking about issues with education and those sorts of things, how does the Maori Party look at education, not just at the tertiary level, but at the secondary level? How does the Maori Party approach education, not just at the tertiary level, but at a secondary level as well? Are charter schools something that the Maori Party is on board with, or is that something that's a bit out of the purview?
Education, for us, is a human right guaranteed by the United Nations at the signing of the Declaration of Human Rights. That being said, education, for the Maori Party, we believe that an educated population is an empowered population. Unfortunately, ever since native schools, way back, we have not had equal outcomes for Maori. We believe in equality, but we also believe in equal outcomes. We've been let down significantly. Yes, there's been some recent rises in Maori and Pacifica achievement, but we have been let down significantly because the education system is geared towards mainstream. And so our whakaaro is what the Ministry of Education is doing through the Kura Haurua model, where communities and kura are working together, because that's exactly what all state schools are about, with the boards of trustees. Kura Haurua is where we can actually answer some of that needs. It's not a band-aid, it's not the one-stop shop, it's not the be-all and end-all of solutions, but Kura Haurua is something that is beginning to work in my home of Manurewa, in Māngere and in others, and it's going to grow because we need to have equal outcomes so that everyone is empowered through their education.
Right, so on education policy with the Labour Party, so what can we expect, not just at the tertiary level, what's driving the policy this year?
So from us, really, it's a fundamental belief in the power of our public education system. And for us, we think that instead of, going off on experiments that have at best sketchy evidence in favour of them to lift achievement and to pull the best teachers out of their classrooms and to attempt to spread their knowledge around at the same time as introducing competitive pay schemes is just ridiculous. So for us, it's about quality for every single child in the public education system, and that is the way forward. So for us, it's 2,000 extra teachers to bring those class sizes down. More time with teachers is proven in all of the education literature to have better outcomes for all students. And so we really believe in the way that we're going to invest in public education for every New Zealander, so everyone gets a fair go.
I think these charter schools labelled a failed experiment, but we've also seen thousands of new teachers injected into the teaching system in the past without that great results. So what do you think about this great failed experiment of your government's, Jack? Are charter schools the way to go, or is it just funding more teachers and putting more investment there?
I think charter schools are the way to go. I think I'll let my friend from ACT say more on this, seeing as though it is their baby, for want of a better word, but from what I from what I understand, the preliminary reports coming back from all schools, aside from the one run by a trade union, are doing extremely, extremely well. So what I can tell you though is that National is very proud of their recent important education announcement, which will see $359 million going into upskilling and training teachers and the creation of 4 new roles to ensure teacher quality and quality teacher practice. And this is based on sufficient research. This was based on an expert, Professor John Hattie's report, and he reported that the most important thing when it comes to ensuring quality achievement is teacher quality. Class sizes, Kieran, is just an outdated mode of thinking, because you know what? At the end of the day, it's the same bloody teacher!
Oi, have you read the bloody John Hattie report? You will actually see Professor Hattie makes quite a point out of how class sizes are an important measure of teacher quality.
But a minimal one in comparison to improving teacher quality.
You're just trying to get around the fact you don't want to properly fund education. Now seriously, between you and your mate in the yellow t-shirt, you are wasting taxpayer money by getting colleges like the Transcendental College of Medication and the Destiny Church to go through an application process to run charter education in this country.
And I would respond to that by saying, you know what, one of our most vocal critics in the past, the New Zealand Principals Federation, has come back and said they are, to quote, pretty damned impressed by National's latest announcement.
Really? Now, with regard to your SCT sort of thing, are you aware the SCT position directly replicates what is already in place through most schools, the MCT?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Kieran?
I think it's time to move on for secondary school education. Curwen and Jack just saw that one out afterwards, but...
Maybe down Catsarelli.
We know one of the things playing into education, something we've already touched upon, is the inequality between individuals in New Zealand. So we've heard a lot about how that's been growing over the last few decades. So we want to talk about that now and ask whether inequality is whether there's something that's inherently a problem for the party that you represent, and what kind of policies you support to deal with that, if so. And I'll start with Trish from the Greens on inequality.
Of course, inequality is a huge problem in New Zealand. And so we released a school harvest policy because we believe that the best pathway out of poverty, and especially generational poverty, which we have now in New Zealand, is actually education. So we released a policy called the school harvest policy, and because we think that it's not only having good quality teachers at school that affects a child's learning, it's also, you know, have they been fed breakfast in the morning? Are they hungry? What sort of environment are they coming from? Are they having adequate health care? And so our school harvest policy would have a dedicated school nurse in each decile 1 to 4 school, and we would also have a person from the community, because schools are an essential part of the community, and we would encourage more more parent participation in schools, because you know you have to have a relationship between what goes on in the house and what goes on at school. And we would also bring in free after school care as well in those schools, as well as free holiday programs, so that parents are actually able to go out and work and support their families better. And we would also support a living wage.
Poverty in New Zealand as well as one of those feeding into the inequality problems that we have. And I want to ask TeRata, is this something you feel kind of let down by the current government over? How does the Maori Party plan to deal with poverty in New Zealand? And what's something been doing so far?
Kia ora. So inequality and poverty is not something that's just happened in the last 6 years. Inequality and poverty has happened way back when my tupuna was given the dog tax and he fought against that, and all of those sorts of things. It's a historic thing. Poverty and inequality in terms of Maori and Pasifika people and lower income people is a historic thing in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So what the Maori Party did in their relationship accord with the government, one of the first things that they did in the term just gone is a ministerial committee on poverty, where ministers from the top are looking at across the whole government what we can do about poverty. We've also had an investment into whānau order, which is where we have not the state telling whānau what they should do and where they should go, but it's about empowering whānau to look after themselves and direct their own destiny for where they can go. We've had whānau order, we've had in the recent budget, and you can learn more about the budget if you come read this book, national claims that it was their win, their great thing, where they gave free prescriptions and free doctor's visits to under 13s, but actually we lobbied privilege for that. And so it's our win, it's our gain as much as it is the whole government's. And also the biggest thing that we achieved, and others talk about it, but we, with the government and the sanitarium and Frontier, made sure that we had a kickstart, so that all of our kids are getting breakfast at Kura. So there's lots of different things we need more, and yes, we also support a living wage, and there's so much work that needs to be done, but there needs to be a special focus on poverty because it is a big deal, it is a big problem.
I want to ask Lily, you just had a whole bunch of different kind of government-driven alternatives come out of the Greens, come out of the Maori Party, and probably gets coming out of Labour as well. What is it that the ACT Party would do about poverty? Is there a task?
Massively increase it.
ACT is very concerned about poverty in New Zealand, but it's important that I use that word poverty and not the word inequality. The problem is what we see from the left here is an obsession with the distribution of wealth. And when you obsess over that, what you forget is the creation of wealth. And it's the creation of wealth and the growth of an economy that helps the poor, that creates jobs, that encourages investment. Whereas when the economy is heading downhill, it's the poor that suffer. They're the first to lose their jobs. And arbitrary government actions such as middle class welfare or the living wage of $18.80 an hour, these always have unintended consequences. If you raise the cost of employment,
you know that Treasury report,
you are going to have less employment, and the first people to lose their jobs will be people with low skills, the young, the Maori, the Pacifica, and the people who have been unemployed for a long time.
Now seriously, the Treasury actually said if you put the minimum wage up, it doesn't actually cost jobs. Embarrassed the hell out of National, I'm surprised you're not aware of this.
I'd be amazed if you talk to a single business owner who said that a raise up to $18.80 for all of their employment isn't going to cost any jobs or increase the cost of living, because that's the other alternative. You either cut jobs or you increase the cost of your products.
GST increase, you both will increase the cost of living.
So let's hear from Kieran and then Trish. So I think both of your parties support the living wage.
Yes.
To a certain extent. So let's hear if it's one of those unaffordable business kind of ideas.
Yeah, so in response to the ACT Party argument that, we just need to focus on economic growth, I would argue that under governments that put fairness first, we always have better economic growth, and that has been the case since the first Labour government under Michael Joseph Savage. So what this means is for Labour, fundamentally at the core of what we do is poverty and inequality, and we actually do believe that the two are linked. And what we plan to do, apart from increasing wages so that being in work is actually a really good outcome for people, so they can support their families with a higher wage, we also think that, it starts in the home, and it starts at school, and it starts in the workplace as well. So, things like healthier homes, with our healthy homes guarantee, things like better school education, so people can actually get an education with enough one-on-one time with their teacher, thank you, so that they can actually get to that tertiary education that allows them to break the cycle of poverty. That is exactly what we're about. Also healthcare, extending healthcare to pregnant women, because we know that the best start for kids is the best way forward for kids, so that they don't end up in poverty later in life.
Again, everything we've heard there is simply wealth redistribution.